Okay, so we have some potential news about a brand new signing for a variety of companies who are interested in Major League Wrestling star Davey Boy Smith Jr. Now, according to a report by Dave Meltzer in the latest Wrestling Observer newsletter, Davey Boy Smith Jr. is reportedly on the radar of several promotions. This includes WWE, AEW, All Japan Pro Wrestling, and Impact Wrestling. Now, Davey Boy Smith Jr. and AEW President Tony Khan reportedly had a chat this past week when they attended Chris Jericho's Halloween party. Pictures of that have surfaced online over the last few days. However, it has been stressed that they aren't, quote, talking any business, end quote, yet, at least not until Davey Boy Smith Jr.'s Major League Wrestling contract expires. Now, Dave Meltzer also noted that Smith Jr. was not leaning toward any one company right now, and his decision would be based on an offer that, quote, makes the most sense business-wise, end quote. However, Meltzer did not rule out the possibility of Smith Jr. re-signing with MLW, especially since the Bulldog has a good relationship with Court Bauer and has known the MLW boss since he was a teenager. It was mentioned that Smith has known Bauer, as I mentioned, since he was a teenager in 2004 and has, quote, always liked him, end quote. Now, for the moment, Davey Boy Smith Jr. is committed to MLW and was at the most recent tapings for the MLW restart, which gets underway on November 18th. Now, Davey Boy Smith Jr. also, this is worth mentioning as well, had been planning to be a regular for All Japan Pro Wrestling and was set for the Champion Carnival tournament before the pandemic hit earlier this year. Hence why All Japan is interested in bringing him in, because that was always the plan to bring him in. Now, Davey Boy Smith Jr. becomes a free agent on December 18th, so about a month or so away. And you have to look at what he can offer all of these companies. As I mentioned, WWE, AEW, Impact, All Japan, and MLW, of course, all interested in what really is a blue chip talent here. I mean, he's 35 years old. He is in his prime, and he has had quite a lot of success since he left WWE back in, when was it, 2011, something around that time. He's worked for New Japan, he's worked for Pro Wrestling Noah in Japan as well. He's a two-time NWA World Tag Team Champion with Lance Archer. They were the Killer Elite Squad, or KES. He's also a two-time IWGP Tag Team Champion, once again with Lance Archer. Obviously, he's currently in MLW. He's going to be feuding with Jacob Fatu over the MLW Championship. And he has also had success in MLW with Brian Pillman Jr. and Teddy Hart. He became an MLW World Tag Team Champion with the New Era Hart Foundation. But you have to remember the history of Davey Boy Smith Jr. when it comes to WWE. This was a guy, once upon a time, way back, I think this was like 2006, 2007. The reports may even still be out there at this point, because I remember reading them at the time. There was a report that came out all those years ago that John Laurinaitis, the former Executive Vice President of Talent Relations in WWE, singled out Davey Boy Smith Jr. as a future WrestleMania main eventer. Yeah, you did not just mishear me. I'm not even kidding. There was a report out there, 2006, 2007, it'd be interesting to see if you can find it, where John Laurinaitis, when he was the Executive Vice President of Talent Relations, he was like, this Davey Boy Smith Jr., he is the guy. He is the guy that's going to be main eventing WrestleManias in about 10 years' time. And obviously now we know, 13, 14 years after the fact, that he was miles off on that one. But you can see why he would come to that conclusion. You can. Davey Boy Smith Jr., he's 6'6", 265 pounds. He's got the genetics of the British Bulldog, the Dynamite Kid, and the Hart family all rolled into one. The genetics are there, the bloodline's there. You would think that he would be a slam dunk in WWE, but it just didn't work out for him. It just didn't work out for him, and he had to leave. And since he's left, he's had success. He's had success in Japan. He's had success with MLW, of course limited, but success is success. So why wouldn't all these companies want him? He's got the bloodline, he's got the genetics, he's got the look, he's got the height, he can work. I think he's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu bout as well. I don't know him about, sorry, but he is involved in that as well. He is legit. He is incredibly legit, and he's 35 years old. He's in his prime, and he can still be competing at the top level for 10 years. So why wouldn't all of these companies want him? It makes a lot of sense to me. So let's assess these options. Where is Davey Boy Smith Jr. going to go? Obviously, the first promotion that sticks out, because it's the promotion, is WWE. Now, what are the options there for Davey Boy Smith Jr.? Well, of course, he has family there. He has Natalya there, who, of course, is family. He also has Tyson Kidd there, grew up with him, trained with him. Natalya's still working on the main roster. She's on SmackDown now. Tyson Kidd, Natalya's husband and best friend and former tag team partner of Davey Boy Smith Jr. in the Hart Dynasty, works there as a producer, as an agent. He's worked his way up quite significantly since he retired due to his neck injury. And of course, Davey Boy Smith, he has history with the company. He was in developmental from 2006-2008. As I mentioned, teamed with Tyson Kidd and Natalya as part of the Hart Dynasty, former World Tag Team Champion with Tyson Kidd, former WWE Tag Team Champion with Tyson Kidd. They had the Unified Tag Team Championships. They even debuted the Copper Penny titles, which were awful, and they still look awful. But during their time, they had big matches. They had big matches against big teams. They had matches against the likes of D-Generation X, Shawn Michaels and Triple H. They teamed with Bret Hart in Canada. They were involved in the Bret Hart storyline against Vince McMahon. They were involved in the Bret Hart storyline with The Miz when Bret Hart became the United States Champion again. And they were factored in, and they were a good tag team. Very strong tag team, technically sound. Tyson Kidd, Davey Boy Smith Jr., D.H. Smith, I think they called him, in WWE. They were very good. And like with anything, when it comes to tag team wrestling in WWE, they had to split the team up because that is the function of a tag team in WWE, is to be split up. They don't care about tag team wrestling. So the same happened with the Hart Dynasty. Eventually they got split up. Tyson Kidd, I think he got like this giant bodyguard that might have been on TV for all of 3 weeks before they dropped him. And then D.H. Smith, he was just on Superstars and maybe losing matches, winning matches, it didn't matter because he eventually got released. So would Davey Boy Smith be willing to go back to WWE? Of course he could go back. And I think if he did go back, he'd probably get a nice push. I mean, as I mentioned, he's a big guy. He's 6'6", 265 pounds. He has pedigree. He has the look. Vince McMahon, especially in 2020, when there are smaller guys in the business now and smaller guys in higher positions, even to this day, if you're a big guy, Vince McMahon likes you. So he would be factored in. Vince would obviously like the look of him. And WWE could pay him good money. As he mentioned earlier, it's about the deal that makes the most sense business-wise. So WWE could obviously pay him good money. But you have to question, would Davey Boy Smith Jr. want to step back into that company right now? We know what happens in WWE. A lot of the guys that hadn't had opportunities in WWE, once they went there, it didn't work out for them. Eric Young, EC3, there's a million other names, The Revival, Gallows and Anderson. Would Davey Boy Smith want to step back into that company? The bureaucracy of that company, a million different layers to speak to Vince McMahon, the scripted promos, the being at TV and then suddenly the script isn't decided. If there is a script, all that kind of stuff. Does he want to step back into that? I don't know. Would Vince McMahon like that he's stepped outside of the WWE and he's made a bit of a name for himself in Japan and on the independent circuit and with Major League Wrestling? Historically, Vince McMahon wouldn't like that because he doesn't like that. He doesn't like WWE people that aren't WWE creations coming into WWE with a bit of hype behind themselves. They always get chopped down, and then rebuilt in the image of Vince McMahon, whether or not that image is good or not. And that's happening even inside the company. If you make a name for yourself in NXT, you have a character that gets over in NXT, that might as well be in AEW or WCW, because Vince McMahon sees that's not a Vince McMahon creation. He will break you down and build you back up again, because that's what Vince McMahon does. So that would be, if I'm Davey Boy Smith Jr., that's playing on in my head as well. I'm thinking, do I really want to go into that? Really? And where would he go if he signed with WWE? Would he go into that NXT system or would he go straight to Raw and SmackDown? I think at this point, considering his age, considering his history with the company, his heritage, his lineage, I think he would probably go straight to Raw or SmackDown if I'm honest. Even though, as I mentioned, he said he's not leaning any one particular way and it's about the deal that makes the most sense business-wise, I just don't know. Business-wise is a lot of things. It's not just money. And WWE probably could offer him the most money. But I just can't see it. I think the things, obviously, that could convince him here to join WWE would be the family ties of Natalya and Tyson Kidd. You cannot rule them out. They are very, very important. Plus, if it's a good monetary deal, you just can't turn it down, especially in this current climate. And of course, as I mentioned, he mentioned about the decision that makes the most sense business-wise. but it does play a part. Money does play a part there. So WWE is certainly an option. I just don't think it's the most likely one. Now, what about AEW? Now, they mentioned in the report Dave Meltzer did, Chris Jericho's a close friend. And Chris Jericho, when he wants someone to come to AEW, we've seen it with Jon Moxley and other names, he will get in that ear and he will convince you. It's great here. We don't have scripts. You can do your own promos. You can do your own thing. It's loose. We're on TNT. We're growing. We're doing well. And we already know Davey Boy Smith, it was in the report, he's had conversations with Tony Khan. Now, it hasn't been about business because a lot of these conversations don't start out with business. Eric Bischoff, he's mentioned a million times in his discussions with the likes of Randy Savage and Hulk Hogan and others. And I'm not saying Davey Boy Smith Jr. is the same. He really isn't. But these discussions they don't go straight into business. It's about feeling out. It's about finding the personality. Is there a relationship there we can build? Does Tony Khan get on with Davey Boy Smith Jr.? All of those things are important and they get worked out first. But you have to look at other factors here in AEW. His former tag team partner, Lance Archer, is currently working with AEW. So you could have Davey Boy Smith Jr. come in and work a program against his former tag team partner or work with his former tag team partner. The tag team division, as we know in AEW, is incredible. It's the best tag team division in the world. But for me, I do think it's missing that big giant tag team of two guys that are over 6'6" and heavy hitters like the KES in New Japan. I think they could do great things in AEW. Now, one thing you do have to factor into that partnership is that Jake the Snake Roberts is the manager of Lance Archer in AEW. Now, I know you'll probably be saying, well, what's the significance of that? But the significance of that is that Jake and Davey Boy Smith Jr. have had heat in the past. There was an incident at some convention where Davey Boy Smith threw coffee over Jake Roberts due to comments made about his father, the British Bulldog. Now, it's been reported that they've since smoothed things over, but that does factor into that one. But I think given that Chris Jericho is there, given the fact that Tony Khan has spoken to him, Lance Archer's there too. He could also work dates for New Japan if he wanted, because so many other guys in their contract allow them to work for New Japan. And we know that Davey Boy Smith Jr. likes to work dates for New Japan. You can't rule that one out. And I think, to be honest, to me, that seems the most likely destination for Davey Boy Smith Jr. right now. I think AEW is the most likely place. But Impact Wrestling, of course, are interested. And I've spoken about in Impact Wrestling recently in quite a few videos, especially post-Bound for Glory. I've spoken that there is, for me, just the lack of a top babyface in Impact Wrestling right now. There is no one true top babyface that you go, right, that's the guy you build your company around. That's your world champion. And I know I said this about a few stars because I do think that spot is open. I think Davey Boy Smith Jr. can be just that. I mentioned he's 6'5", 265 pounds. He is exactly what Impact Wrestling needs. Davey Boy Smith Jr., if he signed with Impact Wrestling, he can, and I think would, be a world champion in Impact Wrestling. He really is the kind of guy you can build the company around. And I look at the talent on the Impact Wrestling roster right now, and there is a ton of it. That roster is stacked, but there is room for improvement. I don't think they have anyone that's like Davey Boy Smith Jr. on the Impact Wrestling roster right now. And I think it would be a massive, massive signing if Impact Wrestling were able to pull it off. Now, can they pull it off? My concern here is you have to look at the other companies interested. And you have to look at the other companies in play right now. Can Impact Wrestling compete financially with WWE and AEW? Well, they're not backed by billionaires. Probably not. I mean, look, Anthem, who owns Impact Wrestling, they have money. They absolutely have money. Could they put a deal together if they wanted to? They probably could. But I do think there are probably stronger pulls for Davey Boy Smith Jr. to go to WWE or to go to AEW. A better financial package. He knows people there. And it's greater exposure. But what Impact Wrestling can offer him is say to Davey Boy Smith Jr., look, if you sign with us, yes, you might make a little bit less money. There might be a little bit less exposure, but you'll be the guy here. You'll be our world champion. We'll build this company and the heavyweight division around you. You're 35 years old. You look like a star. You can be a main eventer. And look, you don't even have to sign a long-term deal. You can sign with us for 2 years. We can elevate you into an even higher main event level talent. Like, and that's what they've said with the Good Brothers. The Good Brothers, and I'll touch on the Good Brothers in a second, The Good Brothers are signed for 2 years. Who knows where they'll end up afterwards? They might go to AEW in a couple of years' time. But at this point of time, gives them flexibility. They can build themselves back up, and maybe that's what Davey Boy Smith Jr. wants to do. Plus, Impact can offer the same thing that AEW does and say to them, look, we'll allow you to work shots for New Japan if they're interested. Because they do that for the Good Brothers as well. So, again, you have to factor into that quote, business-wise. Maybe it's monetary less, but for his career, being an Impact World Champion is better than being a mid-carder in WWE or just falling into, not standing out from the crowd in AEW or WWE. Being a main event world champion in any company is good business. So maybe that's something he has to consider as well. Now, All Japan Pro Wrestling, as I mentioned, are interested. Of course, Davey Boy Smith Jr. does have history in New Japan. He's familiar there. He likes it there. He's competed in New Japan Pro Wrestling. He's competed for Pro Wrestling Noah. And as I mentioned, he had been planning to be a regular for All Japan Pro Wrestling. That was a plan. And he was set for the Champion Carnival tournament before the pandemic struck earlier this year. So absolutely, it's possible that that picks back up. I think the only issue is now is that travel to Japan is difficult. Not impossible. It is difficult. I think there is a quarantine in place still. So you can't really do the Japan travel that you used to. Last year and pre-pandemic, you could travel back and forth. Incredibly taxing. The time difference was brutal and the long flights are brutal, but it was possible. You saw guys do it all the time. Go over to Japan, do a tour, do a couple of shots, come back over to the United States or wherever. Right now, that is very, very difficult because of the quarantine period. It's not impossible to travel to Japan, but if you're traveling there, you're staying there for a while. So it's a difficult situation. So it wouldn't be the first time this year that a run with the promotion was ruined and cancelled due to the pandemic. Just look at James Storm with WWE. So whilst that could happen, I wouldn't rule out that just being off the table completely. And obviously, as I mentioned, we have to consider that he could re-sign with MLW. He's set to return for MLW for the restart. He's going to challenge MLW champion Jacob Fatu. If Court Bauer says to him, look, if you stay here, a bit like with Impact Wrestling, Court Bauer could say to him, look, if you stay and we're going to put you in this program with Jacob Fatu, who they managed to convince to stay too, you can be in that main event program. We might even give you the bout if you stay. Again, it's business-wise. If he can make good money and he can be a world champion, that's something to consider. Now, personally, I don't think he will stay with MLW, but he's keeping his options open, as he should. And the Wrestling Observer newsletter has reported that the relationship between MLW head Court Bauer and Smith, it's fine. They like each other. They've always liked him. They get on. That plays into it as well. There's no issues there. So it's not a case of him wanting out of MLW because he doesn't like the booking or he doesn't like this and that. He's very happy there. And again, so that comes down to, if he's happy, that's business-wise too. So there's a lot of moving parts here. There are certainly a lot of moving parts here. And ultimately, he's under contract until December 18th. So we're not going to know really anything about Davey Boy Smith Jr., his future, until the end of the year anyway. Now, of course, he could, once that contract expired, with a contract that's expired, there's no non-compete clause or anything like that. So once that contract is done, he can go anywhere. He can go absolutely everywhere. And now MLW does hope to re-sign him, but I wouldn't be surprised if he re-signed with MLW, but again, you have to look at the parties interested here. So if I was going to put my neck out on the line right now, and we're about a month or so away from his contract expiring, I would say I could see him most likely going to AEW or WWE, but most likely AEW. But again, anything can happen. He's not leaning one way or the other. Lots of parties are interested in him, and if I'm the likes of Impact Wrestling, I'm making a good offer. Because this doesn't come about that often, so I would make a good offer. But of course, as always, this is just one man's opinion. What are your thoughts on Davey Boy Smith Jr.'s future? Where do you think he's going to end up? AEW, WWE, Impact Wrestling, All Japan Pro Wrestling, or stay in MLW, or maybe somewhere else? Where do you think he should go, as opposed to where he will go? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'll be sure to respond and reply to all of your comments. Really enjoy interacting with you guys and chatting about pro wrestling here on the channel. So let me know your thoughts below. If you have enjoyed this video, please do smash a like on the like button as well. Really just help us out here on YouTube, go up the rankings, and get to people's recommendation feeds if they haven't seen our videos previously. But most importantly, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to Wrestle News 365. You can do that by clicking the bottom right-hand corner of the screen right now. Or if you wait a few seconds, there'll be a subscribe button at the end of this video, along with another video for you to watch. Thank you very much for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. And I'll speak to you again very, very soon.
Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.